Hello everybody, this is Dr. Sturm again with Pivotal Group. This video is a good one. This gets into what to do, what to say. As the doctor in the exam room, we're selling from the chair, okay? This isn't going to be your typical consulting spiel about doing what's best for the patient and then whatever they need, or the sales will follow. I'm going to get into exactly what I say, exactly what I do, and it's worked for me tremendously, so I'm kind of passing it on in this video. First off, disclosures, this is not, we're not going to discuss this typically how it's normally done. I want to make it very clear. It's understood that you're doing what's best for the patient, right? So sure, let's keep that in mind. But what I'm going to talk about are some different areas, some different strategies, tricks. I don't like the word tricks, but strategies that work, that really increase capture rates, increase multiple pairs, increase that revenue per pair sold. And so, like I said, keep in mind that it's understood that you're doing what's best for the patient, but I'm not going to really discuss, necessarily the ethics part of that. We're going to discuss what makes more money. In my locations, multiple pairs, we're well above industry standards. Dollar per pair was way up there, and so I think a lot of this had contributed to our success in those areas. I think the sale starts with the doctor most of the time, and so I'm going to get into that here. Couple goals for the video here. What I want to get out, some of the things that you want to do in your exam room. First thing is you want to explain to them the need for the RX or the update. So that's half the battle there. There's some different techniques that I use that I think can really help out. Discussing alternative pairs, multiple pairs, things like that. There's different ways to do that in such a way where you don't sound like a salesman. Different upgrades and options, same thing. You don't want to sound like a salesman, but you want to get that information out there. They hear it from you. They hear it from the optician. That's already ingrained. That's something they feel like they need to do now. Establishing realistic expectations. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well. I think that reduces people coming back complaining, thought they were getting something, but they got something else. Things like that. We're going to talk about that as well. Part of the goal here when talking to the patient is, you're gaining their trust. They're taking that information you're giving them, and they're internalizing that, and they trust that information is something that they need to use when they decide what to purchase or if to purchase. And the last, capture the sale, cash the check. It's a business. We're trying to make money here. So sure, you're doing what's best for the patient, but like I said, it is a business. The goal of this video is to show you how to make more money. And so it starts with a doctor. So that pretty much hits the nail on the head right there. Hopefully we can prevent our patients from going online, but there's certain strategies here that maybe get them excited about going next door and picking on a frame and ordering from you. So the online stuff's not going away, but we can tackle those as they come. First thing that I do, of course, is you do want to know what their old RX is. So make sure you have all that info. You have their previous RX, the RX that they're presenting in, the last refraction, those type of things. But when you're doing the refraction, there's some different techniques that I use to, may I use the word, convince the patient that they may need an update or need a pair of prescription. And so you're using real numbers. You're not faking anything or making stuff up, but there's different ways to convince that patient that they might need an update or a prescription. So light levels, I tend to keep those not necessarily. Some people like to refract in full illumination. I actually like to bring the illumination down about 50%, maybe a little less. Pupils get a little larger, they get a little bit more blur. And when I give old versus new comparisons, they tend to be a little bit more dramatic. And so that's the experience I've had. Everyone has their own way of doing things, but I like to have the illumination down just a little bit. Monocular comparisons. I do this a lot, almost with, I would say, with 75% of my patients. So for instance, I'm working on that right eye, and let's say they don't have a prescription at all. They said, I'm fine, no complaints, they're good to go. And I'm finding maybe a -1/4 sphere, -50, -75 SIL. On that right eye, before I move over to the left, I'll flip out the quarter, I'll flip out the 75 SIL, and I'll say, how's that look? And they'll say, oh, that looks bad. I said, that's what you see without prescription. They said, oh, gets them thinking, right? So they're thinking, oh man, I guess it's not quite as good as I thought. So, and I may make a mention of, nighttime driving, you're going to notice it more, but I don't let them know what I'm doing until they've told me that that's the vision's not good. I flip it back in and said, that's what you see with a prescription. So now already they're convinced in their head, gosh, I probably need a prescription. So that's the first step, right? So whether or not they're going to buy a prescription or get something, that's something you'll still need to work on. But you've proven to them that, yes, they need something. So monocular, I think, is a little bit more powerful than the binocular. You're still going to do the binocular trial frame, but I think monocularly, I think they'll notice that blur a little bit more. And I do that all the time. Another thing, too, is this monocular comparison. You can do like a difference between old and new. So the sill is a little weird to be able to do. Usually if the sill's, as far as the axis, if it's close enough, then I don't worry about that. But let's say they go from they jump up an extra quarter minus and another 50 sill, right? So what I'll do is I've got my refraction in there. I've got the updated prescription. I click out the quarter. I click out the extra 50 to their old RX. And I'll say, how's that? They say, oh, that's not very good. That's what your old prescription, or pretty close to what your old prescription looks like, right? So when I show them monocularly, they're able to appreciate that quarter sphere and the 50 sill a little bit better than if I were to do just a trial frame with both eyes, old versus new. So that gets them thinking too. So a couple different scenarios where I can use that monocular comparison, just real quick and dirty before I jump to the other eye to my advantage. Old versus new in the 4-opter, of course, I still use the monocular techniques a lot. But I also say, okay, put your old prescription on. They'll put it on, and then they'll pull it off. I'll pull the 4-opter down and say, here's your new prescription. So, light levels are dimmed a little bit. They're going to see that 20/20 line pop a little bit more. You've got the glass lenses in the 4-opter that are nice and clean and fresh, and optically they're so much better. And versus their old glasses that might be kind of smeared up, AR may be falling off, the prescription may be a little off. So they're gonna notice just that extra pop of crispness in that new prescription, even if it's a little. So I basically do that every single time. I don't skip that part. And there's some other techniques if they don't have their old prescription with. Sometimes I'll throw that old prescription in a trial frame, and I'll throw on their old prescription, pull down the 4-opter for their new, and they say, oh, okay, gosh, I guess you're right. There's a difference. Otherwise, there's no other great way to do a binocular comparison. They don't have their old glasses, and you still want to give that in that comparison. I think it's powerful. Trial frame, just like I said, if there's no HAB RX in front of them, if they didn't bring that with them, then you're going to want to, maybe show them real quick. It takes 2 seconds. Pull out those lenses, put them in a trial frame, and show them real quick. So also, things like Prism and your computer RXs, those type of things, you definitely want a trial frame for sure. I trial frame a ton of prescriptions for computer. So I'll say, oh, I'll pull up Wikipedia. I'll usually, search a dog or something, and I'll sit them down there and I'll throw that prescription in front of them at the computer, and it's usually like, boom, they're like, wow, that's awesome. So we'll talk about that in just a second as well. But trial framing and the monocular comparisons are huge to convince that patient there is a need for an update or an RX. So that's kind of your first step. Presbyopes, if I've got a patient, 45 and they're doing just fine, they're doing great, I don't need a reading or I don't need a progressive. So I'll finish up the distance refraction. I'll put the near card in, and I'll click in, maybe they're 45 or whatever. I'll click in +1. I say, how's that look? They say, oh man, that looks much better. Keep in mind, I don't tell them what I'm doing. I want them to confirm with me it's much, much better. And then I let them know what I'm doing, what's going on, because I've found that some people will convince themselves, yeah, it wasn't really that much better. So, because they don't want to have to jump into being, a bifocal wearer, right? They're scared of that. So they've convinced themselves that's not as much of a dramatic change. So I let them know after I show them, I let them respond, and then I use that response to explain exactly what's going on. So the new presbyope, how do we manage that presbyope? I already discussed a little bit about the near card, clicking in that plus, near vision check, right? You basically want to show them the difference with and without, right? And so for me, I also explain to them, you get that low myope, explain to them either they take their glasses off or they need extra help at the bottom of the glasses. I actually use the same techniques with my multifocal wearers. So you got a 45-year-old, patient and they're fine with their OASIS distance only, I'll throw a +1 in front of them and look at their phone, and they're like, "Oh, that's much better." I explain to them what I've done and maybe the advantages of a multifocal contact lens as well. So something to consider there as well. So this kind of translates to the contact lens side of things as well, what we're talking about. Line versus progressives. We're going to talk about this just a little bit more in a second. I also discuss with them, when we're talking to that new presbyope, they're pretty resistant a lot of the times to pull the trigger. And for me, I usually mention that the reading doesn't get better. Typically, it's worse over time, and it's inevitable. Why would you want to suffer for the next couple of years when you can just fix it now? And so that resonates a lot with patients. They start thinking about it, and they say, yeah, you're probably right. Why would I wait? I also discussed the fact that jumping into a progressive with the low power is much easier than waiting and jumping into it with a moderate or high power. It's much easier to adapt to. Everyone's heard the horror stories about getting used to progressives. We kind of touch a pain point there when I start mentioning getting used to them. And I say the alternative is, if you can't get used to progressive, your alternative is doing aligned. And people are they're scared to be in aligned. Most people will do anything to avoid being in aligned bifocal. So when you mention those things, I think they're more willing to, jump into that progressive. Of course, I mentioned easier to adapt to the lower ad power. So here's an example of my Crystal PM. This is what I like in front of me when I'm refracting that patient. I want to know what their last refraction was. So their last final RX, that's actually their last refraction. I want to know what their presenting was. Are those the same? Are those much different? What's going on? And I also compare that to my final RX down there. So I've got a lot of info to go off of. And so I can make a pretty good decision on what's going on. Or when I'm doing those monocular, or, if I'm doing a trial frame, if I need to know what their old prescription was, I can do those. I've got that right in front of me at a glance. So make sure you have that accessible to you always. There's your presenting. There's my previous Manifest RX. Presenting number 2, if they've got a computer pair. I always want to know if they're using multiples, because then I can mention updating, if they've got an office lens or a computer lens or something like that. Kind of left those blank. But of course, you want the auto refraction in front of you in case as well. And then there's your final Manifest refraction. So, you do want to talk about some alternative RX second pairs. And of course, this is where we get into the consultee type talk, right? This is kind of what you normally hear with this topic, right? Do what's best for the patient based on their lifestyle and stuff. So sure, we're going to mention that, but we're going to be brief. I think you guys already know how that works, right? If they're in front of a computer all day, you just talk about computer RXs or office lenses. So, progressives, if they're super busy and they're up and down and all over the place, why would they want a separate reading and distance? So one of the things I mentioned to these patients, especially when they're new progressive wearers, is that just because a progressive can be full-time, distance and near, doesn't mean you have to wear it all the time. And that's important to mention to a lot of these are very hesitant to jump into it. I say, just because you can wear it all the time doesn't mean you have to. It just means when you put them on, you can do everything. So I think that's an important comment to make, because I think that resonates with them in such a way where they feel like, oh, okay, I guess I can do that. I'm not stuck wearing these glasses that I don't want to wear. But when I need them, I can leave them on. I can take them off when I don't want them anymore. So you'd be surprised how effective that is to mention that. Computer prescription, workspace, I trial frame those things all the time. If you want people to buy into those things, and if you want them to pull the trigger on those multiple pairs, you have to trial frame those. If you skip it, you're not going to get that impact you normally would. And trust me, we do a lot of computer prescriptions, and it's because I trial frame them in the exam room. Reading RXs, you can talk to people about that based on what they do. If they're reading all day, or they want, they just don't want to deal with a progressive all the time. Sure, you talk about the reading stuff. I don't need to really discuss too much on the importance of mentioning the reading if they feel like they really need it. So Sun RXs, sure, I don't really talk about that a lot unless it's brought up, but sure, if they want to talk to me about it, I will let them know real quick and brief on whatever questions they might have. I might tackle those. I like to mention second pair sales or discounts because that gets them thinking. Let's say we trial frame to computer RX as well, and I like to mention, hey, your iMed actually gives you a pretty good discount on that second pair, and that gets them thinking. Oh, I guess maybe I can afford a second one. Or my office, we kind of do a buy one get one. Margins are so good with our sourcing that we've got plenty of margin to play with. And so I mention those things real briefly. I don't get into details, but I say, hey, we've got a pretty good sale on a second pair. You might want to ask Zeke about it. And so that sets that up for the second pair sale. Set them up. Zeke knocks them down, and our second pair percentages are pretty high. Every once in a while, the patient brings up, using an old frame, and I'm not the type of guy that's like, oh no, I want to sell second frame, so I'm just going to talk them out of it. I'll say, hey, you know what? I'm going to maintain integrity and say, sure, you can use that frame, no big deal. Get a new frame for the progressive, and if your old frame you want to use that for a computer only, no problem. That's easy. You can even use your multiple, buy one get one, where you get the lenses half off for the second one, or something like that. But you'd be surprised how many people walk over the optical and actually end up getting a second pair of frames anyway. And so let them decide, but let them know that that's an option, and it's pretty easy for us to accommodate that request. I also mentioned too is if they don't have a backup, then they may want to keep their old prescription for a backup and use their vision plan or the sale for a new pair. So I always mention that backup here. If they don't, if they lose their prescription, do they have something they can throw on, or are they up a creek? So that's also another technique where they'll decide, what, maybe I'll keep these, put them in a drawer, and I'll get a different complete pair. So maintain integrity, give them options, talk to them about it if they ask. Setting expectations. This is important, especially with the newer progressives or progressive wearers that have had problems in the past. Adaption, right? So I talk about things like, basically I give them an understanding of how progressives work. For us, we kind of got a good, better, best, and the standard ones, they're just, more basic designs, they're a little less costly. The more premium lenses, they work much better, easier to adapt to, a little bit better vision, but they're going to come at a higher ticket price. So I've correlated the benefits with the cost, so they understand when Zeke talks to them about that premium lens, it's going to be more expensive. But I've already talked to them about the benefits of that. Don't harp on it. Don't make that a 15-minute conversation. I just tie the benefits to the cost and let them know, in a perfect world, everything was free, you would absolutely use that premium progressive. It's going to be the best and easiest to get used to. And that's where the type of progressives come in. So every once in a while, I'll have a patient that'll discuss brands, right? So if I've got a patient that's in a Zeiss progressive or a Verilux is the big one, right? I'll typically mention, hey, we've got a great progressive that works just as good, if not better, and it's not quite as expensive. And so I bring that up very, very quickly, very briefly, and Zeke picks up on it later. And that's one of the reasons why we were able to maintain such great cost of goods margins at my office, is I mentioned those things real briefly. So out of, I think it was out of 1,000 progressives, we did 19 branded lenses the previous year. And so you can imagine the margin that we saved. Of course, all those were solid art designs. And so our cost of goods were very, very low, and we maintained some pretty darn good margins there. Alternatives, I like to mention to patients, I mentioned this before, that, if they cannot get used to that progressive, your alternative is aligned bifocal or separate distance and reading. And when they start thinking about that, they say, well, I think I'm going to really try to make this work. Either they're going to try much harder in getting used to it. I say put it on, leave it on for a week. Don't take it off. If you can't get used to it after a week, come back, let me know. But I've already discussed the fact that the premium ones are much easier to get used to. And the alternative to not getting used to that is going back to aligned or separate pair of glasses. And most people are not super happy about those options. So a lot of times I'll also mention, if I rewind a little bit about the premium progressive, when I mention that, a lot of times I'll say, if they're concerned about adaptation, they've had problems before, or their friend has had a problem, I will mention if you end up with a medium road progressive, it'll probably work fine. The first thing that we do when you come back and can't get used to it, we put you into a premium progressive. We upgrade you because it's easier to get used to. If you're already in a premium progressive and you can't get used to it, you're probably looking at those other options that you weren't happy about. So the best thing I think for them in the back of their mind is go with the best progressive, and that's what happens at our office most of the time is those high-end progressives are what are purchased. Although we do give them kind of a good, better, best option, and so we let them choose. Online discussion, won't get into this very deeply here, but every once in a while I have a patient that'll ask about progressives online, and to me, half the battle is fitting it. So if you take out half the process, then your chance of success are extremely low. I almost laugh a little bit about it when they ask me, so they realize that I think it's kind of a joke that you can get progressives online, and I think I get the point across pretty well the way that I present that. So I don't harp on that very long though. Other lenses, features, sure you can talk about those. If those come up, tackle them. But the point here is you should know those. You should know what your office designs are. You should know what your progressives are, your AR. You should be able to answer those questions if they come up. Patient says, hey, what about those transitions, which they usually call something, they usually call it progressive or whatever. They never get the name right. But they'll ask about the transitions and, realistic expectations, right? You say, oh, yeah, they're great. They darken pretty good outside, but keep in mind they don't darken very well behind a windshield. And that usually gets the patient to pause a little bit and think. And I said, you can always do a separate pair of, distance-only sunglasses and throw them on in the car. And so, those type of things, right? So give them options, talk about it, maintain that integrity, and you'd be surprised at how well these patients will absorb what you're telling them. A lot of the times, this comes up too. I'll mention this every once in a while to the patients where they're concerned on budget, and we're talking about progressives, and I'll say, listen, you know what, if we're on a budget, in my opinion, if you're going to spend X amount of dollars, make sure you spend the money on the lenses first, and then whatever frame fits into the budget. The frame only functions to hold the lens. If you're worried about seeing well, get a better lens. So you're actually, everyone's been practicing that's watching this video. Everyone knows that patient that wants the $400 Gucci frame and they put the cheapest uncoated plastic lens in there they can find, which I always think is kind of comical. And of course they come back and they're not super happy with the vision, but darn, they look good with that Gucci frame. Trust. Looks like I've got these off a little bit, but that's okay. Basically, I think maintaining integrity, discussing the ways to save, right? So if they're talking about using their frame, perfect, great. Don't, in my opinion, you should, that should be a valid option that you're not, you don't give them that tone that you're against it, right? I think that's important. And so give them options, let them know what is possible if they ask about it. We talked about the cost benefit with the premium products. You're not necessarily saying, hey, just get this premium stuff, that's it. I tie in the benefit with the cost and let them decide, along with the benefits of jumping right to that premium progressive or premium product of some sort. So some people really lean on you as far as what they need. So a lot of the times I'll give them, hey, you've got kind of your good, better, best, blah, blah, blah. And my spiel usually is, in a perfect world where everything was free, you would get the, premium progressive with the, premium AR and whatever frame that you thought looked good on you. That's it. And so kind of leave it at that. I don't harp on it too much, but that you'd be surprised at how powerful that can be there. Sometimes giving them too many choices is not a good thing. They just get confused. So make sure you read your patient. They ask questions, of course, answer those questions. If you guys are all over the map, I usually summarize with, hey, this is for you, since you've had issues before, I would go with this, this, and this. Makes a big difference. And so keep in mind, patients or customers only retain about 30% of what you tell them. So if you kind of finish with a closing summary statement of, hey, you should do this, try this, or just don't give them a choice, you should do this because of your previous circumstances, then they'll remember that a little bit better. Even write it down for them if they'd like. Sometimes they'll ask for that. And avoid being a salesman. So there's a way to do this and talk about it without sounding like a sales pitch. So a lot of the consulting stuff that I've heard or seen before really comes off as really salesman-y, and I think it's not very good as being the doctor that pushes the product. You have to be very careful, right? So they trust that they're going to get the right information from you without being pushed to spend a ton of money because it's to your benefit. So make sure you give them those cost-benefit comparisons and avoid the salesman type pitches. So capturing the sale, that's the ultimate goal, right? Let them know your recommendations. Mention the vision care plan. Whether it's the multiple pairs. Say, hey, you've got IMED. They're going to cover part of the glasses, and go check them out. Even if they feel like they don't really need a prescription, sometimes they're like, well, it might not cost me that much money. I'm going to go look at some frames. They fall in love with the frame. They remembered what we did for the monocular blur comparison, and they say, oh yeah, I remember it was a little bit better. I'm going to update the glasses. So you'd be surprised. Second pair discounts, I'll mention that. We talked about that already. Same day sales tactics. This is a technique I use a lot. We have an edger. We edge in house. We edge same day, next day if possible. And I'll mention to the patient, hey, you've got a pretty simple single vision prescription. They may be able to get this done for you same day, next day. And that perks them up a little bit. That gets them thinking, gosh, I'm going to go look at frames then. And so they find something, they like it. They say, hey, you can get this done quickly. And depending on where we are, Zeke says, I can get it done for you tomorrow. And perfect. That you'd be surprised at how easy it is to get the patient to walk in and look at the frames because of that. So also that technique works with progressives. Maybe I get Miss Smith that comes in. She's a 67-year-old, walks in, her progressives are broke. She needs something now. She needs a prescription so she can go to LensCrafters or iMart or something. And so we do all the things that I normally do. I talk up on my stuff and I say, listen, we might be able to get you taken care of today and something to get you by until your progressives come in. And what I typically do is we don't charge them for that single vision lens. I let Zeke know. He edges it, distance only. She orders a progressive. We swap the lenses out. No charge for those single vision temporary lenses. So, I save the day. She trusts us. She appreciates us taking care of her, and we just sold her a $700 pair of glasses. So, great scenario, great tactic. I use that almost every day. So now keep in mind, don't promise them anything, because if it's a super busy day and it's going to take 2 or 3 days, or it's outside the stock lens parameters, then you don't want to promise anything and have them upset. So for me, I know what my stock lens parameters are. I know where those are. Even if you're slightly outside that, if you don't have the exact, let's say you only go to -3 still and she's at 350, put her in a 3. You'll be fine. It's just temporary. The handoff, everyone has their own techniques. We might have another video on effective ways to hand off. This could get quite complicated. We can make this as complicated or easy as possible, but we won't get into the handoff stuff today. But if you don't have a good method, you may want to maybe keep an eye out for that video coming up hopefully sometime very soon. I'll get Zeke on it. Know the products you're selling. If you don't know them, you can't talk about them. You and your sales staff are not going to be on the same page. So definitely know that. And there's the next point, right? Make sure you guys are on the same page. So if I say something and I talk about benefits in a product, they better reflect those very similar things that I said versus something completely different. You're going to lose patients very quickly. The trust will just went out the window. Handoff technique, we talked about that. And so these things, of course, are all about consistency, right? Selling from the chair is useless if you guys don't have a good sales strategy. Zeke's got a couple of videos about just normal effective sales strategies. So we're a big believer of kind of giving them choices, good, better, best, or good and better, versus, hey, here's your progressive option. That's it. Let them choose what price point and what features they want. And if you've educated them well enough, they're going to slot themselves in where they feel most comfortable. So you may not maximize the revenue or get that $700 sell every time, but you're going to get more. Your capture rate percentage is going to be much higher. So maintain profitability and margin. Be on the same page, right? A couple examples. I'll go through these kind of quickly, right? We kind of talked about these already. 25-year-old presents with an annual exam, no complaints. No history of any RX, right? Just shows up, he's got IMED, his mom brought him in, he's got a $0 IMED copay, so he's going to get an exam. There's his refraction, right? When I see this, it's a slam dunk for me, right? I'm going to hit him with that monocular. I'll flip out that quarter sphere, that 50 sil, and I'll say, what's that look like? It's not very good. I'll flip it back. You say, that's much better. And then I might mention, hey, it's a little blurry at night driving. Yeah, it's not great. I have a hard time seeing at night. Okay, well, that's something you didn't discuss before, but I kind of brought it up. I solicited that, and showed him monocularly. Also did the pulled the 4-opter down, pulled it back up. Room light's a little dark. Maybe I turn them all off to simulate driving at night, but he should kind of get that. Oh shoot, I guess I might need something. The concern here without someone with a prescription is they don't want to wear glasses. So I typically will mention, hey, you don't have to wear these all the time. Just because you have a prescription doesn't mean you have to wear them all the time. You put them on when you need them. You take them off when you don't. It's as simple as that. Even if you took these and left them in your car and drove at night, it'd be a big benefit. By the way, you also got your vision plan. They're going to help you cover part of the glasses. They may be able to get those done for you today if you find something you like. All those things, they just roll right off the tongue. I've done this so many times. I literally only take about 60 seconds, maybe a little bit longer if I get a lot of questions about mentioning these type of things, right? You've got a hipster 25. I say, oh yeah, we got plenty of Ray-Bans over there that they look pretty good or whatnot. If you ask questions about frames, right? Second pair, contact lenses, if that comes up, suns, if that comes up. So those type of things, maybe you mention, maybe you don't. But in my opinion, you don't go through the whole list, right? You talk about what's pertinent for that patient and go from there. So talked about the same day turnaround, the handoff. I mean, this is a slam dunk. That patient's probably going to go pick a Ray-Ban off the shelf. Zeke's going to edge it same day, hand it to him. Easy sale that probably would have walked out otherwise if we wouldn't have taken just a minute to talk to him about what we found. Another example, a little bit different scenario. 46-year-old pre-presbyope here, right? Early presbyope, annual exam, a little bit of blur, no progressive history, right? So they're in that single vision still. I've got my correct info in front of me there, right? Presenting RX. We're kind of a hyperope, low astigmatism. And then we got our final RX there. So a little bit more hyperopia there, and then we kicked in a little bit more sil. So that'd be a very easy monocular test, right? Clicking an extra quarter plus, clicking a 50 sil and show them the difference. They're going to say, oh, that does look a little bit better. Boom, they're convinced. Distance prescription, we need a little tweak, right? Once we're done, we may show them the full prescription, right? Old versus new, 4-opter comes down. They can tell the difference, light level's low. Talk about, hey, you're going to see much better, especially at night, blah, blah, blah. And then this is where I put that near card in front of them. I click in, +1, +125, and they say, oh, that's much better. And that's where I start talking to them about the progressives. And I say, once you start diving and pushing them a little bit more, they tend to open up a little bit. Yeah, maybe a little bit of near stuff. I'm having a little bit of problem possibly. Everyone, as far as that ad is concerned, everyone's going to be a different spot. You got to be careful with these early presbyopes that are hyperopic. You can't push too much plus on them with the ad. But, in this case, showing them that benefit there for the reading really gives them some perspective. In this case, patient's kind of resistant, doesn't want to wear a progressive, they're concerned, adaptation issues. I mentioned the kind of the good, better, best, the difference of progressives, adaptations. I also mentioned, hey, you don't have to wear these full time, because come to find out, they were actually just throwing those glasses on just routinely, just to help a little bit of reading, maybe distance sometimes. But in this case, I said, listen, you can either get a separate reading and separate distance, or you can put them all together. And you can still approach this the same way. When you want to see better, you put them on. You can do everything you need to do. When you want to take them off, you take them off. It's as easy as that. So, but as far as getting used to them, I say leave them on for 7 days. So adaptation, we talked about the types, different options that they come up. You can mention the frames. If budget comes up, you can talk about putting the money into the lenses versus the frame. There's so much to discuss as it comes up. You'll have to decide what's appropriate and what's not based on what that patient's saying or what you feel like the situation requires. Same day turnaround, maybe the patient wants something now, or maybe they came in and that pair of glasses that I checked the presenting was broken, right? So you can still put them in a progressive, but you'll put a temporary distance only prescription in for now. So don't feel like you are going to miss those type of sales if it's a progressive. You can still put a temporary lens in. We do that all the time. It works awesome. That's it. That's my spiel on selling from the chair. I think it works well for me. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. If there's any questions, if there's any concerns, email Zeke. But any questions, realistically, let me know. And thanks for watching.